G'day guys, welcome back to the Bounty Riders YouTube channel, and today I was actually thinking about something. What would happen if the likes of VFL sides and Werribee were able to go up against some of the top AFL sides in the competition, but not only just in a seasonal format, but in a knockout tournament? As we have seen in European football, they do have some cup competitions with a knockout format. For example, in the FA Cup, Arsenal, which are one of the top teams in the English format, can go up against League 4 sides where you can see players that only have a part-time job, while of course players at Arsenal are getting paid huge amounts of money, millions and millions of dollars. So I was wondering, what would happen with these sort of leagues in the lower grades going up against these big titans of the AFL? And today, that's what we'll be going over in this video. Now, I myself love following the bandwagon of these lower grade sides and following the David vs Goliath battles against these top titans, as we see in English football. But of course, in the AFL, the structure of these leagues are set out a lot differently. There is obviously a lot of things that would be standing in the way in a competition like this. For example, the things that would be standing in the way are things like player packets, which would obviously have to change for the extra games that would be within these tournaments, broadcast deals, extra players for these other teams, extra expenses for state clubs such as the VAFA, the QAFL, and other leagues that would be in this competition for things like travel and accommodation as well. And of course, there would be a lot of other factors that would be standing in the way of a competition like this. But for this video, we'll be living in the land of fantasy where all of these situations have been sorted out, and it would eliminate all the obstacles for a knockout tournament in the AFL. And if that was the case, I actually think there would be a lot of positives towards a knockout tournament. For example, I think more games would definitely please a lot of the supporter bases of the AFL sides as well as the lower grade sides as well. I think potential draftees could get a lot more exposure before being drafted into the AFL, as we know right now that a lot of draftees actually aren't seen too much before their draft year, and even throughout their draft year, they're barely shown at all. So I think a competition like this could give draftees a chance to play for these lower grade sides, and you get a little bit more exposure from these AFL clubs. And not only do I think it would be better for exposure for draftees, but also for state leagues, as the AFL are planning to bring a reserves league competition in the next couple of years, which means that for the likes of Werribees and Woodville West Torrens and the Sandful, they won't be getting as much exposure against AFL reserve sides. So this will give a lot more exposure to those state league sides as well. And lastly, I think it will give a lot more opportunities for players in AFL teams that aren't exactly in the best 22, but can be picked in a best side against these lower grade teams and get them a lot more in-game experience for things like structures and that the coaches want them to play. But now let's get into our next question of how a competition like this would operate. And I've actually came up with a few suggestions on how a knockout tournament would work with a few AFL competitions. So I have gone through and looked at 3 tiers of AFL football. In the third tier, we'll be having the lowest grade of AFL competitions at this stage, which are the likes of the VAFA, the QAFL, and the SAAFL. Now this will combine a total of 32 teams to the competition. After that, we get to the second tier of this competition, which will be the likes of the reserve leagues. So we do have the Sandful, the VFL, the WAFL, and the TSL, which is the Tasmanian State League. Now this will bring a combination of 30 different teams to the competition. Now we have eliminated the likes of the reserve teams from the AFL in this competition, as like I mentioned earlier, we are likely going to be getting a reserves league for all the reserves AFL teams in the competition in the next couple of years. Thus, there is only 7 from the VFL, 8 from the Sandful, and 8 from the WAFL. Finally, of course, we'll be having the 18 teams from the AFL, which brings us a combination of 80 different teams to look at for this new knockout format. Now I just want to bring up a few different points of information about things that we could change to the regular AFL season to accommodate for this new knockout format. For example, I think the best case scenario is to change the AFL regular season down to 18 games. This would allow for every single AFL team to play against each other once and then have them play their rivals twice, which does even out the competition and does save players for cup games, but of course the AFL finals format will stay the same. Now I would have the AFL season start a little bit later to have this new AFL Knockout Cup starting a little bit earlier, but the AFL season would still finish at the regular time of the last Saturday in September, which would be the grand final day, of course. Now I've also come up with the idea of possibly having this tournament have time differences as well, So for example, like the pre-season games that we've had in the past, where it would be 20 minutes of time on throughout the quarters, and then the remainder of the quarter being a stop-start format. As you would see, if the ball went out of bounds, the time would stop. Just to have a little bit shorter games, which would lessen a little bit more injuries to accommodate for extra games for this format. Now just the final two things. One, I think the grand final of this new knockout tournament would be hosted at the MCG or a neutral ground. I think that would be fair enough. And also I would have the final of this competition either into the first few weeks of the AFL season or finishing just before the AFL season beginning. But now let's talk about the tournament itself. So for the first round of this tournament, this will only involve the 32 teams in the third tier of the pyramid that we just showed before. Now this would allow for half the teams of this third tier to be eliminated, which would bring it down to 16, which brings the total number of teams to a nice number of 64, which would actually make it the perfect number for a tournament style of event, as if we continue to halve the numbers of teams being eliminated from 80, we would actually hit a snag when hitting 5 teams remaining, thus the reason for going with 64. But after that, the true tournament begins. We would have 16 teams from the third tier, 30 teams from the second tier, and of course the final 18 teams from the AFL. And next, these teams would be allocated a number. Whatever two numbers are drawn together will be the first matchup for these teams in the tournament. And the number would be allocated to a certain team based on their place in the alphabet because, well, I don't know, I just think it's the easiest way at the moment. But then it's pretty simple after that, guys. The winner moves on and the loser bows out. Now, like I said at the start of the video, I highly doubt that the AFL would implement such a tournament to the competition, but of course we can dare to dream. But guys, if you have stuck around till this point in the video, I really do appreciate it. And not only would I love you to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, but also show a friend. If they are an AFL supporter like you, I'm sure they'd be really interested about this video. But anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I really appreciate it. Check out the podcast, by the way, it comes out every single week. That's all from me though, so I'll catch you all next time.